All right, so our first conversation now. Nigeria faces a severe housing shortfall with estimates ranging from 17 to about 28 million. And that's depending on your source there of where you get most of this data. Despite ambitious public schemes to get, affordable housing, we're still seeing that big deficit. They're helping us to unpack this today. We have Mr. Remy Oshinkalu, who's the MD, IFT. Realty, joining me right here in the studio. It's great to have you.
Great to be here. Thank you so much. Good afternoon.
Yeah, so is this housing matter again? And, definitely if you're someone that was active in the real estate market maybe about 5 years ago or 6 years ago, you'd notice that you could, buy a property maybe somewhere around Chevron, Lekki, the full duplex for about 50 million, about 60 million, but that's not the case. Right now we're seeing incredible prices, for real estate, and that's happening with rentals too. And there's also this issue on social media where you hear some of these influencers, social media, talking about some real estate companies selling receipts to people and not land. What are you seeing?
Well, it's thanks for having me again. It's a sort of complicated but not complicated matter. So the guys that are talking about people selling receipts and bad players in the real estate development space, they're correct. But that happens all over the world. You have good actors, you have bad actors. The challenges that developers face, however, in Nigeria are also unique to Nigeria. So if you're coming up with a development, let's say in the Bejuleki scheme area, you have to do your own roads. You have to sand fill. You have to bring in your power. You have to bring in your security. You have challenges with Omonile. So all these things have to be factored in.
And that's a cost.
Those are costs. And so once you incur those costs, you end up having to transfer them to the purchaser. But in terms of the real estate deficit that we have, if we use the top figure, 28 million, Nigeria has, let's use the top figure for Nigeria as well, of 280 million, if we're that many. So that's 10%. So there's no way private developers can bridge that gap. If you look at the history of Nigeria, we had LEDB that was founded in 1928, Lagos Executive Development Board, where, schemes like the Surulere scheme came out of there. If you look at the Shagari era, we have Shagari Estate, we had Gowon Estate in Ekpaja, we had the Bodija scheme in Ibadan that Awolowo built. These things, the only way you can get
I believe we have a renewed hope scheme.
Yes.
Right now.
Yes, we're aware of that, but the government just has to do more. Government has to come in to provide land and then bring private developers and partner with them and provide mortgages. And that's really the key. Single-digit mortgages by the government to ensure that we could, and they must have an ambitious scheme. Let's say we want to build 1 million houses per state, for example, in the next 4 years. That only gives us, a significant amount of houses, but you would have to scale it up.
Right, and talking about mortgage, at this time we're seeing, central bankers globally, they've had to struggle, to bring down inflation. We see some countries winning, with their inflation numbers, but they've had to raise rates, and now there are calls for, rate cuts in the US and, some other parts. But here we have elevated interest rates, and I'm wondering how that plays into mortgage. If we actually get a developed mortgage scheme here in the country, if the rates stay at this level, does it change anything?
Yes, the kind of rates that we've seen in the market are not comparable to any way that I've seen. We're not even talking about double-digit schemes. If you go out to try and get a loan here, we're talking almost as high as 30%. If I'm building a 10 million naira house and I'm paying 30% interest or 25%, it's not sustainable. To bridge the housing, let's forget the Lekki and the houses for people that already, for the big guys. Let's go down to the brass tacks. If you want to do business and bring down the housing deficit, government intervention by developing new schemes, partnering with real estate developers, and providing special vehicles, mortgages that are specifically drawn up by the central bank and the government to target this deficit. Anything outside that, the private developer is in trouble, because if the private developer goes to borrow at 30% and you put in a 1 billion naira sort of stock, you're already owing 300 million if you got a 30% loan. You pass that to the buyer. And then we have the challenges of power, we have the challenges of infrastructure, we have the challenges of the Omoniles and all these other several governmental agencies that come to play. So it's tough. It has to be a deliberate government effort, partnering with private sector.
Right. And, talking about raising capital, at this point, what trends are you seeing, so far, since we're seeing it's quite expensive to get, loans from the banks? What are developers doing, at this time to get funds?
What I found is that the Nigerians in diaspora are the ones that are actually keeping a lot of these things afloat, a lot of businesses, because, so if you're in the diaspora and a developer is able to put together a scheme that is attractive to that individual, then and they give them a payment plan. So developers are now turning themselves into financiers. They would have to say, I'll give you a 1-year payment plan or a 24-month payment plan. And some are even doing very well with 60-month payment plan. But this is not the role of a developer. This is the role of a finance institution.
But the developer is not that patient.
Exactly.
It's not patient money.
But for the developer to be able to sell down, they would have to give some sort of incentive, which is a payment plan. And this is where those issues come up, where they're selling receipts, because the developer is also hedging. He goes to buy land, he hasn't perfected the title, he's trying to get money from prospective buyers. But if they were just very transparent with it and say, look, we just have registered survey, this is not good, it's not perfected title. Do you want to come in almost as a partnership? But they don't do that. They just say, look, we own this land and we're selling to you, and this is where all these challenges come.
And in some cases, they don't really own that land.
Yet.
So
that's the challenge. So what happens is there's this huge tract of land in, let's say, Mowe or Fada. You went there, you spoke to them, you spoke to the Omoniles, you signed the agreement with the Bales, but you now have to deal with the government, whether Ogun State or Lagos State. So some developers will now say, let's raise money from sales prior to perfecting title, and they want to use that money to perfect titles. Now, if everything works well, everybody's happy. But sometimes things fall apart.
Right.
And
you don't have the influencers on social media calling out some of these companies.
Yes, and some of these call-outs are not legitimate. I will tell you that. Some of them are just situations where people are in a contract. Let's say you have a contract to buy a property and you should pay for 1 year. If you default, your contract says you lose maybe 25%. People now use weaponized social media in order not to honor their own contracts. And they'll just say, no, this developer is not giving me back my money. So I want to encourage the social media influencers to also take some time to ensure that before you pull someone down, you sort of look at all the paperwork. It's not always the case.
Right.
Now, there are bad players, there are bad actors, but there are situations where the developer is also the victim.
Right. So let's imagine I'm a prospective investor and I'm trying to buy land. I don't want to buy, where land is really expensive. So they take me to the outskirts, and obviously we have all of these issues with maybe not fully owning, the property. So what's the first thing I do, when I'm, being sold a land, the outskirts? I don't know what to expect, going forward. What do I do first?
Yes, I think it's such a fantastic question, and I've been preaching this everywhere I go. The challenge we have in Nigeria is we came from an informal ethnic sort of background, where my father owns the land, there's no survey, if you point to that tree, from this tree to that tree. So we've continued with that system. Lagos State is leading in changing that system. They're trying to digitize everything. They have their own challenges, but they're really putting in place things that would work. So, but for us, as traditional people, I shouldn't just come to you and say, hey, laddie, I'm buying land. That's not your area of expertise. So I advise people, if you want to get into any land transaction, get a lawyer. Retain a lawyer. Don't cut the cost in terms of a lawyer. Now, what's the first thing that you should do? But if you get a lawyer, they will do that. You take the survey of the land that you're buying, and you go to the Surveyor General's office, and they chart the survey. And the Surveyor General will let you know whether the land is subject to acquisition or it is free and clear of all encumbrances.
Well, let me just take you back a bit. How do you choose the right lawyer? Because I've seen cases where, you know, you get a lawyer to do search and all of that for you, but the land still ends up bad, and the lawyer okays the land.
Yes, so these are, you see, we're still in infancy. So I live in the US and I do business in Nigeria. So we have a system which we've been trying to encourage here, which is called title insurance. So when you want to do any real estate transaction, you get an attorney, a lawyer, and then you also get a title company that will do the search. And they will do that search, but they will issue you title insurance so that if you build and things fall apart and you discover that there's a challenge, the title company, which is the insurance company, will now have to pay you. What we are doing here is just wild. We're just, you know, people are not using professionals. If a lawyer does something, there's a disciplinary committee for the bar. But we don't use that. If a surveyor does something, they have a surveyors association. But we make it almost informal. Oh, Baba Kunle, Baba, you know, you go to your church, you go to your mosque and say, God forgive, just, you know, you didn't do it purposely. So we have to start formalizing the economy properly. And this creates employment. One of the questions is, how does the real estate sector create employment? Imagine if every real estate transaction you had a lawyer and you had a surveyor.
The lawyers get paid.
They get paid. The surveyor gets paid. The agent gets paid. The people that do the search, the expediters get paid. And then the real contractors and the suppliers. And imagine if we started building just 2 million houses in Nigeria to be delivered by the end of next year. The multiplier effect, the woman that has a bakery, the woman that cooks food, the bricklayers eat, the pure water person. At our project in Shalom Park Estate, we have somebody that just comes to cook for everybody, and, you know, so it's a multiplier effect that will help the economy.
Quite a big value chain.
Yes, fantastic value chain.
There, and definitely we're hoping that, you know, people, because at the end of the day, if real estate is so expensive, that means you're having to put a lot down, you know, to get in. Yes. It'd be terrible to get scammed,
yes,
when you're trying to make such an investment. But we'll keep, you know, the conversations, you know, going.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was great having you.
Same here.
Today. That was Remy Oshikanlu, MD, IFT Realty. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.